What's up, everybody? It's Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know, and on this channel, we break down the trials and cases you care most about so you can understand how the American civil and criminal justice system works. And we try to make sure you understand what your rights are in every situation, which is why we try to walk you through the entire legal process while also answering your insightful questions along the way. And while it's not legal advice, it's always exciting. So buckle up for another episode of The Lawyer You Know. What's up, everybody, and happy Monday here. As is with every weekend, a lot of information has come through over the last couple days, some of which is legitimate, some of which is not, some of which is worth discussing, and others are not. But there's a lot to talk about in this Idaho 4 case, as well as the Lori Vallow case. And these cases are kind of connected because they're both in Idaho. They're both what I expect to be capital cases in Idaho. The Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell case supposed to go to trial this year. And this Idaho case, so many details are coming out, what feels like literally every single day. So today I'm going to have my dad join us to talk about this gag order, on who wanted the gag order, whether or not it's working, what happens if people violate the gag order, and who it actually applies to, right? We talked about who it applies to before, but I think there's even an extended circle of people that may be leaking information. We're going to talk about whether or not it extends to them. And then we're going to get to the Lori Vallow case. And the reason the Lori Vallow case is going to be interesting is I think that Bryan Kohberger is going to follow a similar argument here, potentially with an alibi. Lori Vallow has filed paperwork noticing the state, putting them on notice that she, in fact, has an alibi at the date and time that some of the murders that she's accused of committing occurred. And as we know with Bryan Kohberger from the probable cause affidavit, his cell phone was off during the 2 hours of the murder. So will he have an alibi? And if he does, he will have to follow a similar procedure that Lori Vallow and her attorneys are following. So we get to see what that looks like in another high-profile case in Idaho right now as we speak. And if you stick around till the end of the video, if we have time, I'm planning on playing another interview with Kaylee Goncalves' father and the family's attorney to talk about how social media was used in this case, why it was used in this case, how it could affect future cases, and how the Goncalves family attorney himself looks at this probable cause affidavit from the side of a prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney, because he was both, as was my dad and I. We all look at these things from both sides to see how a lawyer on either side would attack this and would argue this. And then an absolute overtime bonus, if we have time, a very short clip from one of your favorite lawyers, Camille Vasquez, who's now a legal analyst, breaking down and giving us her quick take on this case. If we have time at the very end and you guys want to stick around, we'll get to that. But for now, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We hit 172K, Cheryl. Thank you. We're so close to 175, which is our next giveaway. So make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Subscribing is free. Liking is free. You can do that. Or as Shannon and Charlotte's Web, you can always join the membership crew if you want to dive a little deeper here on some of these members only chats that we do. Also, after we watch all the clips and do everything, I am going to announce the winner of the Lawyer You Know first ever fantasy football league, 20 teams. There was only one winner, and one winner will get a prize, but we'll get to that at the end. For now, let's jump into this gag order and talk about how it may affect the case. And let's bring Big George to the screen here. What's up, Dad?
Hey, good afternoon.
All right, so we know that there's a gag order in the case. And in the gag order, which we read together in another video, both sides agreed to this, okay? Knowing both sides agreed to it doesn't necessarily mean that one side or the other was not the primary or not the requesting party, which happens a lot in civil cases, criminal cases, whatever it may be. In this sort of a situation, who do you think would actually ask for the gag order?
Well, actually, I would think the defense would ask for the gag order.
In this case, there have been reports the defense was the one that wanted this gag order. I've seen a lot of people saying they think the prosecutors want it. A lot of people saying they think the prosecutors pushed this. To me, it would absolutely be the defense attorney in this type of a case that would want a gag order. And it seems like that's what the reporting is saying at this point. I don't know where those leaks are coming from, right? Because there's a
Well,
gag order and now we're starting to get
well,
leaks.
but
So
if you request a gag order, like say the defense does, what's the prosecutor going to say? Oh no, we don't want a gag order because we want to talk to the press. They can't say that, so they're stuck. They have to agree to the gag order if one side asks for it.
they can, but then it would look very bad on their part, like they're trying to try this case in the court of public opinion, which a lot of civil lawyers do things like that. A lot of civil lawyers have no shame when it comes to trying cases in the court of public opinion.
Well, a lot of criminal lawyers do too.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've seen it time and time again when stuff like that happens. So, but in this case, it seems like all the reporting is saying the defense asked for this gag order. Why would you think the defense would want the gag order? Why do you think they're more likely to, and probably the appropriate thing for them to do?
Well, number one, let's face it, the press has been, he's been convicted in the press. He's guilty. He's the guy that did it. So any evidence that came out of the prosecution, the press would give it great coverage. Anything the defense said or tried to present would come out biased. And therefore, they really can't get a fair trial in the court of public opinion, I think. I don't even know how they're going to get a fair trial in that area. I think they're going to have to move out of that area to get a fair trial, even find a jury that doesn't already have an opinion about it.
Sure. And I think that the real point is right now, especially when we look at the probable cause affidavit and we listen to the reports, and we've been hearing from law enforcement throughout this case from multiple jurisdictions and FBI included. We've heard from prosecutors. They have all the information. I mean, if we're assuming that Bryan Kohberger did it, then sure, he has all the information because he was there. But if he's presumed innocent at this point, the defense doesn't really have a lot of information. Now, we're going to talk about the fact that they've already hired experts. They've gone to the scene. They've inspected the scene. They were there for 12 hours. So they've done some work on it now. But for the last 6 weeks, law enforcement and the state has been able to go over all of the evidence and are way ahead of where the defense is at this point. And so leaking these potentially pieces of inadmissible evidence, things that are not necessarily credible, but still make Bryan Kohberger look guilty, is going to cut against him seriously. And some of the things that I've heard come out are that he has mental health issues, that he was seen by law enforcement cleaning every inch of his car with surgical gloves and cleaning materials while in Pennsylvania. He took trash from his house to a neighbor's house in Pennsylvania and threw it away. All things that are being spun to prove he's guilty, and there was evidence on the car that he was cleaning off, and yet it wasn't in the probable cause affidavit. We haven't seen if it's even going to be evidence that they're going to use in the case. But these are all leaks that are coming out post gag order. So how would you look at that as a criminal defense lawyer, seeing these leaks come out, knowing that there is in fact a gag order?
Well, first off, let's talk about a couple of things. One is the defense may not want to reveal the evidence they have. So they want to keep things quiet. So that way they can keep the state from saying things, hopefully. And they want to keep it close to the vest and not reveal their defense till closer to trial, because they don't want to give the state a lot of time to counter their defense. So they may be doing this deliberately and staying quiet deliberately. The only way they can do that is to keep the state quiet. Now, these leaks are a bit of a problem. Ethical lawyers aren't going to leak this stuff. Ethical law enforcement are not going to leak this stuff. But for instance, when you talk about the cleaning of the car, that was done in Pennsylvania. That could have been a Pennsylvania law enforcement officer. That Pennsylvania law enforcement officer is not necessarily covered by this gag order because it's an Idaho state judge. The Idaho state judge cannot punish the Pennsylvania police officer. Now, he can do some things in his courtroom. If that Pennsylvania officer decides to testify, he can say, you can't testify because you violated my gag order. But he can't be held in contempt. The other issue you have is the FBI. The FBI theoretically is not really governed by the gag order because the FBI is a federal agency, and a federal agency isn't subject to state judge control. But again, that judge can control his courtroom and not let the FBI testify as a consequence of their leaking information. Although I'd be honest with you, I doubt if it was the FBI that leaked the information.
So the number one major issue with this is, how do you prove who leaked what? How do you prove who said what? How do you prove what agency leaked what, right? So we don't necessarily know that. And whether or not the court has jurisdiction over Pennsylvania law enforcement officers or FBI is arguable and questionable. But I think what it really comes down to is they do have power over the state attorney's office in this case and the prosecuting attorneys in this case. And if they feel like anyone working as their agent, whether it's the FBI or whether it's Pennsylvania law enforcement, they do have the ability to sanction or punish or prevent certain evidence from coming out from the prosecuting attorney if they feel like they're trying this case in the media, which would violate the gag order, right? So that's really what it comes down to, is whether or not they think the prosecutors are directing this or agents of the prosecution are leaking information to pre-try this case, taint any potential jury pool. And that's really what it comes down to. That's why it's so hard. Like a gag order really is like a, what do they call it? Like where you, when you judge yourself, it's like the honor system, right? With the gag order, it's the honor system. Try not to, or let's not reveal any information, but in reality, anonymous sources stay anonymous for a reason, and they'll never go back to that news station or reporter or whatever it may be if they do let out their information, especially when it could have such serious consequences like in this case, and nobody wants to blow this prosecution. If he is the right guy, they want to make sure they get the case tried properly, have him convicted without any major appellate issues, so everybody's on the same page with that. But it is kind of like the honor system.
Well, I don't know if anybody remembers an old movie called Absence of Malice, where what happened was the prosecutor left a file sitting on a table, and he knew that a news reporter was going to come into that room. So he leaves the room to go to the bathroom or something. The news reporter comes in, sees the file, reads the file, and does a report. Well, that's on that prosecutor. And, so that's why you've got to really to show that there's some deliberate or intentional action by the prosecutor for them to be held in contempt for violating the gag order.
Right. Cheryl, hi, I'm going to start you off with a super chat. I really need to go to bed soon since I work third. Did you see Lori Daybell filed some motions and basically said she had an alibi? Yes, and we're going to get to that after we finish the Idaho 4. I want to bring this up in case you had to leave and come back for the rewatch crew, but I'll save this comment for when we talk Lori Vallow. So what would you do in a situation where you felt pretty confidently that a prosecutor either directed, knew about, law enforcement that was helping a prosecutor, an agent of the prosecutor in a case, violated a gag order like this?
Well, normally you file an order to show cause, where you ask the judge, issue an order for them to show cause while they shouldn't be held in contempt for violating your gag order. But you've got to have some basis for filing that motion. You can't just say, gosh, I really feel like the prosecutor did something here. You've got to have some basis. And be honest with you, most judges do not hold prosecutors in contempt. It's just not something that happens very often. And in fact, prosecutors really don't deliberately do it. It can happen accidentally. Like I doubt if they directed the surveillance crew in Pennsylvania to say that they watched him clean his car. I doubt if the prosecutor really directed anybody to do that. So I think it's very unlikely that you'd get a prosecutor held in contempt for violating a gag order.
Sure. And I agree with that, but I still think sometimes filing a motion or a motion to show cause or something like that can make it give even more teeth to a gag order.
Well, it's therapeutic. Let's do it that way. It's a thing that said, look, prosecutor, we're not letting you get away with this. You may not be held in contempt, but we're watching you. And anytime you do something, we're going to file a motion. And finally, the judge is going to say, where there's smoke, there's fire here. A lot of stuff's going on, and may actually have a hearing and require the prosecutor to respond.
Myra Nicola says, finally caught alive since joining Lori fam. I can't even watch videos with an abundant amount of speculation anymore. You and EDB are my fave. I just want the facts, not the effery. Happy New Year, y'all. Thank you so much, Myra. Yeah. And when you talk about like the speculation, right? Since our last video, we have seen people say, I was a running mate with Brian Koberger. I was a classmate. I used to, smoke pot with him. I drove him to do heroin. So now he's a drug addict. We have his mental health stuff. So he's got major mental health issues. All this stuff comes out. And that to me is kind of the negative of social media and its effect on this case. But what I'm really interested to know, what we didn't get a lot about, as you wouldn't expect in a probable cause affidavit, is motive and what his connection is to these victims. And we don't have that yet. And I've seen some interviews with former FBI agents, law enforcement. The why is not important. Motive doesn't matter to me. I just want to know who did it and how I can prove that they did it. And while technically they may be right, nobody likes a motive more than a jury. And when you've got a good motive, that can overcome some holes in the evidence, maybe even some reasonable doubt in some cases. How important do you think a motive is in this case?
Well, you explained it very well. A motive is always a wonderful thing to have. It's always beneficial. It always you're right, covers up some maybe issues you have in your case, when you can really prove these people really had a reason to do this. Because a lot of people, you go say, oh gosh, it was an accident, it didn't happen. No, you had a reason you were there, you had a reason you did it, and here is why. And juries want a reason. Juries are just like us. We're sitting here thinking to ourselves, boy, wouldn't we really like to know why he did this? And hopefully someday we will know why he did it.
Yeah, I do think it's important in a case like this, because it would just be, if he has any good alibi or evidence as to he wasn't there or why he would be driving around their house, and he has no clue who these people are, has never met them, it would be a little bit tougher, I think, to connect these dots. I mean, they have a lot of evidence. The number one piece of evidence is the DNA on that knife sheath in their bedroom. That's going to be near impossible to get over. But a lot of the other evidence, I think, can have some holes poked in it. Let's get to some questions here. B. Galecki. Number one, did anyone else notice the face twitches of KB? I think he means BK during the arraignment. Nervous much? We've been through a lot of these arraignments. We've talked to a lot of clients that have been accused of heinous crimes. They all react differently, right? I mean, I don't think facial reactions, myself personally, I mean, sometimes you can tell with a smirk or a smile, like he looks like he's enjoying them read the probable cause affidavit, which I didn't think we had here, can tell you something. But did you notice anything in the arraignment or anything of any of his facial expressions that stood out to you?
It's a big mistake to read anything into what happens. Think about it. If you're innocent, even, let's presume, which he is, he's presumed innocent. You're sitting in that courtroom, you're hearing somebody read what you're accused of. It might cause you to twitch. It might cause you to get a little bit nervous, a little uncomfortable. Most people haven't sat in courtroom. Just being in a courtroom makes people nervous.
And there's actually more on that from Kaylee Goncalves' dad later, that we'll talk about what his perception of Brian Kohberger was. All right, number two, vegan and erratic. Family has to throw out pots and pans, yet KB, I think he means BK, is going to a Thai restaurant in Indiana. Did he bring them new cookware? So I'm not, neither of us are experts on the vegan diet or, what plates and pots. There have been, reports that he made his aunts and uncles throw out pots and pans to cook them certain food, whatever it may be. There's so much made about his vegan diet. We talked about how law enforcement's going to do their best, but it's not the Ritz-Carlton. They're not going to bring in new pots and pans and cooking for him specifically. Do you think his diet is going to come into play at all in this case?
Well, right now we don't know any reason why it would. I can't see it other than if somehow it had something to do with his DNA that they found back in Pennsylvania. But I doubt very much that really is going to have anything to do with it.
Chloe said maybe he didn't hurt the dog because he's a vegan. Could be true. We don't know. All right, number three from Galecki. Number three, trash left at curb. Questionable ownership, right? Not when you walk even further to the neighbor's land, as FBI law enforcement observed and dump it. So I think the question may be here is, could he argue this was somebody else's trash? Well, not when law enforcement actually sees you walk holding the bag and throwing it into the neighbor's trash.
I think it's going to be hard to do because if I remember this right, in that trash was the father's DNA.
Right.
So, all right. So how does the father's DNA get in the neighbor's trash unless it was his trash? So, there's a connection. There's a nexus to the trash. You got the father's DNA, which is 99.999 accurate that that's the father. So they're not going to have any trouble connecting this trash up to him.
B. Galecki, we got all three of your super chats. Thank you so much for them. Now all four of them. Usually what we try to do so that you don't have to do another one like this, hopefully, unless you want to, we'll hit whatever the topic is, and then I'll fire away at some Q&A, and then we'll get to topic number two, which we're not done with Idaho yet. There's one other question I want for my dad here. I'm a DoorDasher. Our movements are very well documented, which is a good one, Michelle, to have right before Dana asks, DoorDash delivered at 4. Murders took place at 4, between 4 and 4:23. Is the DoorDash person a suspect? No one was eating after the delivery. Seems odd. That's not being discussed unless I missed it. So I have actually heard law enforcement discuss that they have ruled this person out as a suspect. They did talk to them. I think Michelle is right that their movements were well documented and they knew exactly who that DoorDash person was. But they would be a suspect, don't you think? I mean, I'm assuming they ruled them out.
They would be, but I think it'd be easy to rule out. There was also some events that occurred after 4 a.m. that would also rule him out. I think there was some Twitter activity after 4 a.m. So it's easy to rule a person like that out that has movements that are certainly regulated.
Rosemary said Maddie and Zena worked at a vegan restaurant in Moscow. And that right there, I think, is the best way that this vegan stuff can really get connected. And it's been confirmed by multiple sources that he is, in fact, a vegan. Although Emily Flotilla says a true vegan wouldn't carry a leather sheath, which makes sense. And Savannah echoes that. So, I mean, there are some weird things in this case. Allison also said it. I mean, everybody is pointing this stuff out, and the vegan stuff can connect dots, but it can also disconnect some dots, right? Maybe he can say, I would never touch a leather sheath. Maybe he's going to use his aunt's comments about how he wouldn't even eat off the pots and pans to prove that proves I would never touch a leather sheath. I don't know. Somebody else got my DNA. Who the heck knows, right? So like you were talking about before, we don't necessarily know what the defense is going to be in this case. Lynn says, as far as evidence, I can understand how this may seem like an easy win for the prosecution, but can't most of this be explained away from or by the defense too? What do you think?
There's going to be some tough ones. The DNA on the sheath is going to be a real tough one.
That's the toughest one.
Yeah, that one. How do you explain that there was DNA on the sheath of the knife, which allegedly was the murder weapon found in the house next to the bodies? How do you explain that? That's going to be tough.
Yeah, to me, it only sounds like somebody stole his DNA and put it on there. And how believable is that?
Or they stole his knife. I
guess that's true. That's probably more believable. But then why is his car there? They stole his car too. Michael Sharp. People usually throw out envelopes addressed to them in their trash. So that's true. That's how they could confirm it was from the Koberger residence. If they have envelopes with their address on it, but then it's thrown away in the neighbor's trash. There's lots of ways to prove that. Mama Rebel. Could a defense be he intended to stalk or rape but not killed and panicked? I don't believe this, just wondered. That would be a very bad defense for him. There's no way to really win that one. Rosie, just want to say merci to your dad for his time. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about on the Koberger side before we get to Vallow is you mentioned earlier that you don't think it's beneficial at all for the defense to leak anything. In a high-profile case like this, what if they wanted to leak an alibi, or they wanted to leak that he reported his car stolen 2 days before this happened, or they wanted to leak that he was actually teaching class until midnight the night before and it couldn't have been him, whatever it may be, I don't know. But if they did have something beneficial, can you see a situation where it would be beneficial for them to leak in response to the leaks that are coming down still from law enforcement, it seems?
I'm only going to talk about this particular case, just Idaho, not generally. This case, there is so much out there against them. They'd be better off saving it for a jury. Those 12 people are their audience. Those are the 12 people they have to convict or have to convince, not the general population. I don't think they have a chance in hell of convincing the general population it's not him. So let's wait, save it for the jury.
I think that's an amazing point. They're not going to convince the public at this point. They're not going to convince the public. I've got a lot of respect for the Goncalves family, which we've seen a lot in the press. They have been really, in my opinion, saying the right things as far as he's presumed innocent. I didn't have a lot of confidence. And once I read the probable cause affidavit, I got more confidence with each line and whatever. And you expect them to be that way. But they have really, in my opinion, shown more grace towards the process than really they even have to. And they're being convinced by the evidence, I think, as well, because they didn't just automatically know it was him. They don't know what the connection is necessarily. And that to me could be, we talked about some of the negatives of social media. The biggest benefit to social media and all of this stuff is if they can find a connection and a motive.
Well, social media, and I can tell you from my experience in this case, because I listen to both. I find social media really helpful because there's more analysis on social media and more people talking about things, and you get a longer version rather than a 5-minute soundbite off of CNN or a 10-minute soundbite. So what that family is doing, I like you. I give them credit. They're not being vindictive. They're actually being reasonable, and they're being very good people. They're showing that they're good, solid people.
And to me, though, I don't necessarily mean the negatives. I don't necessarily mean are the family on social media. I mean the TikTokers and the people that are, accusing people or acting like they solved the crime or whatever it is. I think a lot of negative can come from that, or people trying to get their 5 seconds of fame saying, I made Brian Koberger a burger one time. Well, that's probably a bad analogy since he's a vegan, but you know what I mean? Like I saw him one time at Walmart and trying to, get on some news station for an interview. Mace, if Brian pleads guilty, will we ever get the full story? He seems like the type to withhold information and want to create the intrigue and speculation forever. Just because you plead guilty does not mean you have to give motive. It doesn't mean really much of anything. You just have to say, yes, I did it. I understand my rights that I'm waiving by pleading, and that's it.
Well, if he pleads guilty, that will really shortcut the story.
Correct.
I mean, that really will. We will never find everything out.
But at the same time, the family will get some sort of justice. They won't have to go through a public trial. They won't have to worry about losing and him, walking free or anything like that. So I think there's positives and negatives to just about every outcome that happens in this case. All right. We're going to transition now, John, if you want to hit that timestamp, to Lori Vallow. She has filed recently a notice of alibi. And when we see these kinds of cases, and it's a murder case, and we've got the same thing with Brian Koberger in the Idaho 4, and they file a notice of alibi. When you see them file this document in this jurisdiction, they have to put the state on notice that they are going to argue an alibi. Why is that, Dad?
Well, because it's not trial by ambush is the theory that you hear from the judges, is that if they do have alibi, they have to tell them about it. Because understand, alibi is a little bit different. It's not an affirmative defense. It's not like insanity. So that the state is still going to have to prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and they're going to have to prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt that he was there committing the crime. And by the way, I know you'll get to this, but the two alibi possible defenses are night and day between these two cases.
Right. But hold on. Let's first get to this notice of alibi. Let's look at what this alibi is and talk about how much it could possibly help Lori Vallow's case. So here we go. Lori Vallow Daybell, notice of alibi. Comes now the attorneys for the defendant and pursuant to Idaho Criminal Rule 12.1 and Idaho Code 19519 provide notice of alibi as follows. Lori Vallow was in her own apartment in Rexburg, Idaho, when J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan died at the apartment of Alex Cox, who is Lori Vallow's brother, in Rexburg, Idaho. Alex Cox has since passed as well. Defendant was with, and here's an important part, right? Defendant was with Melanie Gibb, David Warwick, and or Chad Daybell. A little weird that it says and or there. Whether was she with him or was she not? Number two, Lori Vallow was in Hawaii, an even better alibi, when Tammy Daybell, Chad Daybell's ex-wife, died at her home or at the home of Chad Daybell in Salem, Idaho. Defendant was with Melanie Boudreau and or Audrey Baratiro. So why put the people's names that she was with in her alibi?
A lot of times the rules require it, require that you give them the names of the witnesses to your alibi. And keep in mind, this alibi is no surprise to the prosecution. They knew exactly where she was at the time of the murders, and they probably interviewed all these people already, so they know exactly what these people are going to say. This is no surprise to anybody in the case that she was not at the scene of the crime when it happened, and she's not charged with being at the scene of the crime when it happened.
Correct. And that's the important part, right? Is I think they put these names in here as well so that these people can be deposed. They may be called as witnesses. They may say that they were with, Lori Vallow or Chad Daybell at either of these locations. And the state has to be on notice or has the right to be on notice if they want to flesh this out, look into it, prove that this was true or false, whatever it may be. So that's why you have to notify the other side usually when things like this are happening so that they can do their due diligence, do discovery, do depositions, and figure out what the truth is behind all of this. But when we look again, which we've looked multiple times at this indictment, I'm just going to pull up one of the counts here so you can kind of talk through how an alibi like this, saying I wasn't there when this happened, may be different in a Brian Koberger case with the Idaho 4 versus Lori Vallow, who is accused of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Even the first-degree murder counts they were part of a scheme or plan or continuing criminal transaction between different counties in Idaho to commit these first-degree murders. How does alibi apply to charges like this?
frankly, I don't even know why he filed the alibi. I mean, he may have some inventive theory that I really don't know about, but this alibi filing just is not going to have any impact on this case at all. It is going to have no impact on the way the state tries it, the witnesses they call, and how they put it on, because from the very beginning, we knew the state was not saying she was there committing the actual acts. They were saying she was part of a joint enterprise, a part of a group of people that designed this crime and carried the crime out. And it's, a conspiracy, all it means is you have to aid, abet, or conspire with somebody. You agree to commit a crime and the crime is committed. This is really a worthless document. It doesn't reveal anything to the prosecution they don't already know. And it certainly is not something the prosecution is going to worry about.
I mean, we even have a lot of evidence around her ex-husband, Lori Vallow's ex-husband, where her brother, again, Cox, killed Lori Vallow's ex-husband in self-defense, at least as it was at the time. But Lori Vallow was in and around the house, just left. Alex Cox comes back. The kids may have been around. So she didn't actually commit that act. But who do you think is behind it? And again, when we look at this case, we see motive, we see connections, we have all of that, which we don't have for Bryan Kohberger. So I think, Cheryl, this is to answer a lot of your questions, in that we really don't think that this alibi or this notice of alibi is really going to have a major effect on this case. We think potentially the mental health deficiency or insanity defense, as Idaho has it, which is not a full not guilty by reason of insanity, but just that you can't form the criminal intent, that would have been a much better defense in our opinion. But it seemed like by reading that, Lori Vallow did not want to file that document, did not want to plead that. So they have said, they have let the state know and put them on notice, we are not going to make that argument. So instead, they have this weak alibi argument. So you wanted to talk about how you think this alibi argument in this case would be different than Bryan Kohberger. Why'd you say that?
Well, it's night and day. Bryan Kohberger actually is accused of actually committing the crime on a date, in a place, on the victims. She is not. She has never been charged with being present at the date, in the place, on the victims. She's always been, everybody always knew she was somewhere else. And we always knew where she was, frankly. None of this is a surprise. So it would be effective if you had an alibi in the Idaho case, whereas it's not effective in Lori's case.
Yeah. And frankly, it didn't matter where she was in the day, the month, the year, prior to, before, after, during the commission of these crimes, right, because she had people working for and around her
and
that were bringing things to pass.
This is a one-person crime as far as we know. There's no other people involved.
You're talking about Kohberger, right?
There's no conspiracy. There's no group. There's no enterprise. There's nothing. There is him and there's the crime.
Which is why an alibi would be huge. And which is why even the potential of an alibi, because he didn't have his phone on for those 2 hours, is there. And this is kind of what it would look like procedurally if he were to file a notice of alibi. So that's why I think this is really kind of interesting that we have two cases in Idaho similarly going like this, both high profile, that people know about. Thank you, Tina, for this super sticker. So I think that it is, a really interesting defense on their part from Lori Vallow. And I think they're doing what they can do. So the last part, Dad, I'll have you in on if you want to, is to watch this video with the Goncalves' family and their attorney. We're going to transition back to that. John, if you want to throw another timestamp on there. Linda asked, hello there. Been watching you for a while. Love the content, Peter, and everyone's questions and input. Has anyone been watching the Ampha Walsh missing husband charged with misleading information case? So this just happened, I think, in Massachusetts. A woman disappeared. Her husband misled law enforcement. Now they found like blood and stuff in his basement. He bought $500 of cleaning materials. He's been charged with misleading law enforcement, but he's got a $500,000 bond. A lot is being reported, not a lot that we know, not a lot to legally break down in this situation. But how often have you seen, Dad, people get arrested for smaller crimes before they get arrested or indicted for the big crime so that they can hold them, like in this situation?
Oh, all the time. This way they can make sure they don't run, make sure they don't leave the country, make sure they know where they are. Oh, absolutely. And it gives them control over their body and their person.
And this happened in Brian Laundrie's case with Gabby Petito. If you remember, they didn't ever get him. But the first crime he was charged with was, I think, using her credit cards. And so that was how they were going after him, not a murder charge, which we later found out he was responsible for her death. Thank you so much, Sydney. All right. So as promised, let's get to the interview here with Kaylee Goncalves' parents. Yes.
You necessarily need me to stay on for this?
No.
Or? Oh, okay. All right. Because I'm going to sign off. I've got something I've got to get done.
Okay. All right.
Okay. We'll see you later.
Ya. All right. So we're going to watch this video together, and then we will watch a snippet of what Camille Vasquez thinks about this case. So let's get this up on the screen. Then, of course, we'll answer more questions. All right, here we go.
Good morning.
Good morning. Steve, were you there? Were you there in the courtroom?
I sure were. We expect to have somebody there every day.
What did you think when you saw the suspect, the man that might have killed or is allegedly killed your daughter?
Yeah, when I seen the defendant, I seen somebody that looked like he was overwhelmed and had no idea what was going on. He didn't look as confident as I thought he was going to be based off of his background.
So I think this kind of flies in the face a little bit of what a lot of us or a lot of people in the chat may have thought, that he was going to be confident, that he was going to come in there and look a certain way. Or somebody said, he had this twitch, which shows that he may have been guilty. I actually think that maybe it wasn't that way. And that's kind of the way I got the vibe from Mr. Goncalves here.
How'd you feel, though?
Oh, my feelings were, I was angry. I'll be honest. I was angry, and I wanted to do, my mind was filled with different things, but I kept my cool and my composure, and there's a right way to do things. And that's what I was thinking about.
Steve, I can't imagine. Also want to get your reaction to this affidavit, which revealed a lot of information we didn't previously know. What of the revelation, what were new to you? What details stick out to you?
The actual location of the sleeve, the knife sleeve, that we had heard that there was a sleeve, but we didn't know the location. We heard there was a DNA, but there wasn't a hit in the database. So knowing that they had put all those things together in the timeline that they wrote from like the beginning to the last page was very precise, and it painted a picture of, weeks and weeks of investigation and following. And each line gave me a little bit more confidence that we were in a very good position.
So I think it's important as well. The biggest piece of evidence to just about everybody is that sheath, is the DNA on that sheath, including Mr. Goncalves here. So that to me is legitimate.
Steve, there's so many questions. As great and as informative as that affidavit was, there's still a lot of questions out there. Just curious, did they keep the families involved? And if so, how? Did they say, we're very confident we have a suspect, we think we're getting closer? Did they let you see this timeline before they actually even made the arrest?
No, we filled in parts of the timelines through the time. It was a co-work that those guys did by far the vast majority of the work. We kind of inserted ourselves, and we said we need to be communicated. We wanted to have meetings. We wanted to be helpful. We had this audience. We had people that were willing to listen and willing to help and provide information that may have been missing. We had this white card to look for. So yeah, they helped, and we worked together. But I didn't have the details like that, and I told them not to give me any details that could accidentally mess up the case.
So do you?
So he told them not to give him any details that could accidentally mess up the case. And they talked this interview about how they use social media, how they got in front of the camera, how they kept the pressure on. But he knew that they wanted to be careful not to mess up the investigation. So he's got a lot of respect for law enforcement, which he has said in other things. And I think that really, really, really makes a lot of sense. I mean, I really think that makes a lot of sense.
Did you know for the first time, like we did, that one of the roommates came face to face with him and described him with bushy eyebrows, with a thin build, but an athletic build, the way we now know that was written? Did you know that?
I'd heard that somebody seen somebody in a mask. I didn't know if it was something that was like yelled out, and one of the people that was downstairs heard that. I did not know it was one of the people downstairs that actually eyewitnessed this person. And to me, it was just a call. So I wasn't positive that it wasn't just a rumor. So we never mentioned it.
So see, there were details he didn't know, and they knew the other victims' families, obviously. And that's something that just never got around to them, which I think is really interesting, especially when we think about the Petito laundry situation, about who knows what and who should share what and when. So it's interesting that he didn't know that until the probable cause affidavit, at least the details of it.
the details in the affidavit are kind of shocking, but I'm sure we'll get the more details as time goes on. But yeah, it reads very bizarre.
Shannon, if he is convicted, do you expect the death penalty?
Well, I think Steve and the family have talked about it, and I think it's something that the decision that will be made by all the families on whether or not the death penalty is something that the state pursues on this case. So I don't think it's just a decision for the Goncalves family. I think it's a decision for all the victims' families, and then, they'll see where it goes from there.
This lawyer seems really balanced when he answers. He's not overly belligerent for his clients. So I think he makes a good call here to remind everybody about the other victims' families, how the Goncalves are not the only one making the opinion. He represents them. He's pushing and fighting hard for them, but he's really even-handed. So I appreciated that comment.
Shannon, you had a chance to look at this affidavit as well. How airtight is the case as you look at it right now?
Well, I thought the affidavit was a lot of.
And here is how the Goncalves family attorney looks at that affidavit as a former prosecutor and current criminal defense attorney.
Information was in the affidavit, and it sounds like it's a solid case. I was a former prosecutor myself, now a criminal defense attorney. I look at it in both ways. As a prosecution, it looks like it has a really great timeline. There's DNA evidence. There's the evidence from the cell phones and the automobile, and that he was aware of the location coming back and forth. So there's a lot of good information there. And then when I flip over to the defense side, I still have a hard time understanding how they're going to get past the DNA evidence on the sheath. A lot of times in cases that I've defended, sometimes you go in and you sit down and you talk with the defendant and say, hey, this is a great piece of evidence. How do we get past this piece of evidence? And so I think that's one of the most convincing pieces of the affidavit is the DNA evidence. So
Sometimes, Steve, you have gut feeling.
So again, if you notice, he only mentioned that one piece of evidence on the defense side. So I think it's, and I saw somebody comment here recently, actually, Kathleen, have you watched Andrea Burkhardt on Legal Mindset? She discussed how the PCA can be challenged by the defense. Interesting. I've seen her tweet a lot about it. And we talked about it when we read the probable cause affidavit, and we've mentioned a lot how you can poke holes in a ton of that information in the cell phone pinging, in where the car was, and a lot of that stuff. I think the video of where the car was is really important. There's a way the defense attorney can attack the eyewitness, but that DNA on the sheath in the location where they found the sheath is the absolute hardest piece of evidence. And you're going to continue to hear it on this channel. And it sounds like you're going to continue to hear it from this attorney, because that's really the only piece of evidence that he'd be worried about as the defense attorney. He didn't say that. I'm adding words to it, but he didn't mention that he would be worried on the defense side of any of the other information, but he would ask his client, how do we get around this really good piece of evidence? And I think that was telling.
Feelings. Did you think when you looked at this guy in the jumpsuit, you were looking at your daughter's killer?
Yeah, I did. I did a research before I came into that courtroom. I was looking for a certain look. I wanted him to meet me eye to eye. He had done that exact same behavior previously when he was in Pennsylvania, and he chose not to, or he was afraid to look back. And for me, that wasn't a good sign.
What about the fact that he smiled?
I didn't see it. I heard about that later.
And I respect, thank you, Rebecca, for the super sticker. I respect the fact that he doesn't just, and again, I'm being complimentary here, but it would be really easy for him to say, yeah, he smiled. That made me knew he did it even more. Like, it'd be really easy for him to say something like that. And he just doesn't. He's like, I didn't really see him smile. He's being honest. He's calling what he sees. And, I just respect that.
I don't know. It's hard to comment on that.
Steve, we're all parents. And for every parent watching, when you give birth, you hold that baby and you have all these dreams for them. And you go through the hard years, the years of them always being with you and needing your help to get the small things, the cereal, the milk, and all of that. And then you go through the hard teenage years. And then you look forward to their 20s when they're going to get married and they're going to bring grandchildren home. And you've gotten through all that and you've raised these amazing kids. He robbed that from you and your wife. What goes through your mind when you think about that? Do you think about that when you see him, or do you just want to jump over and do what most dads would want to do and take him out? Or take him down and, beat him up or whatever it is?
I mean, the physical side is there, but I know that's not realistic. So what I go with is I can make this man feel like he picked the very worst family to do that.
I don't like speaking bad of people asking questions. These questions that this poor family gets are miserable and brutal. But, people have a job to do, and I understand that. But I want to point out how well he answers the question. And he says, I'm going to let him know he did it to the wrong family. I'm going to be there. I'm going to follow through in this process. And then we get another little window into why people were, at some point saying this Goncalves family, they want attention. They're making money off of their daughter. They're getting clout or fame or whatever off their daughter. There were people not in this channel or in this chat, but there were people on other channels and, media and whatever saying that about this family. Well, guess what? That's not the case. And he's going to let you know right now why they stayed in front of the camera and why they kept the pressure on through social media.
Too. And every time he turns on the TV, he sees us. And every time he thinks something positive is happening in his case, he sees one of us communicating and he realizes he has zero hope. That's what I hope. And that's what I can do. I don't want to worry and think about things that I'm still going to, but those aren't realistic things for me to just put my time and energy into. I might as well stay focused on what I can do. And
he wanted to make sure that if this guy was on the run and he thought maybe this case is going cold, maybe they'll forget about me, maybe I can get lost, maybe I can hide from this. Every time he turns on his phone, every time he turns on the TV, I want him to see our face. I want him to see my daughter's picture. I want him to know we are still looking. And to me, I mean, this is going to have an effect on the future. If Bryan Kohberger pleads guilty or gets convicted, you can expect more of the same in the future. Hopefully it'll help law enforcement and not overburden the system, but hopefully we can use technology, use social media for good, use the power and the information that we have for good and to catch the bad guy and to stop future bad guys and gals. Hopefully we can do that. And that's what this family was focused on, not for media attention. They don't want to answer questions like this. This has to be brutal. Anybody that would think they would want to do this for any reason just doesn't understand what grieving is like and dealing with situations like this. But I thought that was a great answer and a legitimate reason for doing exactly what they did throughout the entire investigative process.
I want this guy to be sick of seeing me, sick of hearing the cases. New evidence keeps coming in from audience members, just like what you guys have on today. And I want this case to get stronger and stronger to the point where he realizes that he's not going to be on the planet that long.
Steve, you've been
Exactly. I mean, hit the like button for that, right? Hit the like button for that, because that was a great interview, great statements made by Mr. Goncalves, and that's really what it's all about. That's really what it's all about. John Garner. Hey, Peter, Andrew Tate pulled one of my comments from your short and called me out on Twitter. Thanks, Peter. From which short? I think I did one video on Andrew Tate. I don't think it was a short. That's wild. That's what comment? What'd you say, John? What'd you say, man? KWNY Upstate. Why can't we have a death penalty option where the victims' families can press the button or whatever and end their lives? So people have talked about this. This has actually been discussed in states, usually back in the day, not recently. I'll tell you why, the number one reason why. A lot of people that, there have been interviews where people get revenge, let's just say, in different situations, and it doesn't fulfill them. They actually have regret. They wish they wouldn't have done it regardless of what happened to them. And we would never want to put victims' families in that situations where they had to make that ultimate decision, where they had to push that button and live with that forever. I'm sure some would like it and would want it, but overall as a society, we decided not to. Johnny, wouldn't the state decide to pursue the death penalty and not the families? Yes, but in every jurisdiction, they talk to the victims' families. They get their input before making a final decision on seeking the death penalty. Ultimately, if the state doesn't feel like they have enough evidence or doesn't feel like the case fits into that, they won't, but they always talk to the victims' families. Lamars, trying to get caught up on this case. I've been watching Lawyers and Dragons to show support for Hogue Law. Thanks for all you do. I've been hearing some really positive reports from Hogue Law and his recovery. He can read messages now and see what you guys are doing. So go share some love and prayers on Twitter, on YouTube. Get in his comments, watch his videos. So, cause he is getting it now. He is getting the love and support. So let's keep bringing it. Kathleen R. Andrea talks about DNA and how the quantity/quality of the sample can be questioned by alternative experts. It's funny that she mentioned this because we have done this before in cases and we've gotten experts before in cases. And it's interesting to talk to the jury afterwards. When we talk experts, right? And we'll probably do this in this case, and I will poll you guys and use you guys as potential jurors because you're the best at it and you focus you have attention to detail. You can usually come in pretty unbiased regardless of what you think and look at this evidence objectively. But once the state says, so they have all this other stuff, right? His car and like what you can call smoke and mirrors, it's legitimate evidence. So I don't want to belittle it, but his phone was turned off for 2 hours. So that proves he did it. No, but we're going to bring context and circumstantial evidence. His car drove there 12 times. So I'm going to say as the state, he was stalking. He was preparing for this. The car drove in front of the house. The cell phone was turned off just for the 2 hours, but it pinged there other times. He has vans. I assume they're going to get, there's going to be a lot more evidence. And then when you just add on top, and there's the sheath from the knife that committed the murder with his DNA evidence on it, it's really hard, regardless of how good your DNA experts are, to go and say, well, this evidence is not really how you do DNA. There wasn't enough quantity on it. The quality of the testing, it could have been somebody else's DNA. The 0.01% is actually more than you think it could be. It could have been a family member. It could have been somebody that shook Brian Koberger's hand before doing that, or gave him a hug, or had his shirt, or stole his car and picked up his DNA from the steering wheel of his car. There's a lot of ways to argue that, but I'll just tell you, it's hard when you get to the point and they stack all this evidence and then you have the quote unquote smoking gun of the DNA on the knife sheath to pick it apart one by one. There are ways, absolutely, but that's why we call it the hardest piece of evidence to overcome. It's not like Darrell Brooks, where we have a video of him committing the crime. That's impossible to overcome without jury nullification, which he tried. Azam, Peter, is a gag order the same thing as an injunction? No. Is it logical to think someone planted his DNA on the sheath? I'm sure you'll hit 175K subscribers soon. Hopefully. I would love to hit it maybe by next week. We'll see. If we can get enough of you to subscribe, we'll hit 175 and we'll do a giveaway. If we can do it on a live stream, that's even more fun. And I can pick a winner that's in the chat, the live chat during the live stream, to give something away to. I don't know if it's logical to plant his DNA. Azam, I would think he would have to bring something to the table to show that it was planted. I don't think the argument, the poking holes argument that criminal defense lawyers can do of, well, maybe somebody planted his DNA. I don't think that's going to be enough. I think he's going to have to bring something to this jury to prove that this DNA was planted. John, I think a good DA would tear apart the sheath with BK's dad's DNA. I feel the best argument is the vehicle, and that's why the affidavit majorly focused on the vehicle. And what's cool about this chat is you guys are representative of prospective jurors, of prospective jurors in different jurisdictions. Each one of you can look at this a little bit differently, and each one of you may find a piece of evidence more damning than another. But at the end of the day, a lot of you are going to come to the same conclusion, and that's guilty. And so that's how it would happen in a jury room. But let's wait to hear all the evidence before we make our final decisions. Golden Girl, you seem like such a good man with such integrity. I know you have a daughter, same age as mine, by the way. That's awesome. Do you think you would be as calm as the father? Impossible to answer. I would just automatically say no, think the worst. Like, I would be a basket case if this happened to my daughter. It would be a life ruiner, but I also believe that we're given the strength to deal with situations that are put in front of us that we don't even know we have until we're in there. So I would hope that I would handle it this way and do it the right way. Carlos Jones, how do you find a good jury after all public info? Sometimes you've got to go, we've had trials where we've had to go juror by juror, asking them questions, looking into their eyes. What have you read? And sometimes we don't even ask the final question, like, do you already think this person's guilty? But just if they have read and listened to and consumed enough of the media that have these details in it, especially if any of you jurors said you read the probable cause affidavit, you'd be out, because not everything that comes into that probable cause affidavit is going to come in a trial, is going to be admissible evidence. So if you've already read all of that, you probably know too much. You've probably made judgment calls. You probably believe certain evidence in there because a cop said it in a probable cause affidavit. So you probably would not qualify as a juror. It would be very difficult. We have gone through cases. I mean, we did one over 10 years ago, or I should say just less than 10 years ago in federal court, where we had news clippings that we said, did you read this newspaper? Did you subscribe to this newspaper? Did you get this every Sunday, or whatever it may be, that had articles about our client in it? So there are different ways to attack it and ask a lot of different questions. And from being on here with you all, I would craft questions that also get into their background, what they've dealt with, kids in college, school shootings, things like that, because all of that I think can come together in saying, whether or not this person is a good juror for this case. Salt Phone, I'll subscribe if you bring Daddy Tragos Sr. He'll be back. Don't worry. He'll be back. John Garner, Peter did a short on taking a delay. Oh, I said, why do today what you can do tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? And Tate got triggered off of the Be a Lawyer short. Tate's watching my Be a Lawyer shorts. That would be shocking. He's one of just a couple people. Francine Harada, thank you for the super sticker. Ellen, not Sarah Lee Hogue. DM froze when she saw BK. DM was the only one BK saw and did not X. She didn't even text her roommate to check if she knew they were up because she heard them talking. Why? I don't know, is the final answer. And here's what I'll say. I'm not going to condemn DM. I'm not going to say she did anything wrong. I'm not going to say I would have done anything different than her. All I'm going to say is it's going to be questioned by defense lawyers. And I think there's very plausible answers that she could give to make us understand that, yeah, that's reasonable. And we'll just see what happens at this point. We can't really know how we would act in that situation. It was brutal and horrible. Maddie McAllister, do you think his visits to the home in the prior months at those hours were because Kaylee would have been taking the dog outside and he knew it? I honestly have no clue. I have no clue why he was there, if it was stalking, if it was even him in the car. Those are still questions to be answered. Rosie, to paraphrase what Peter said, God doesn't choose the qualified, he qualifies the chosen. Exactly. Exactly. And that's what it seems like is happening with the Goncalves family, honestly. Julie Green, new member, and Chris Hollins, thanks for the super sticker, buddy. All right. To finish this out here, let's see what Camille Vasquez, new legal analyst on, what is it? CBS, NBC. Let's see what she has to say. It's a short clip. It's only 2 minutes, but let's hear how she breaks it down. I think she's mostly a civil lawyer, but she still knows about the criminal process, I would assume. So let's hear what she has to say.
All right, let's welcome in our NBC News legal analyst, Camille Vasquez. Camille, good morning. Good to see you. So size up this case. We've got DNA evidence. There's a living person who was in the home who saw some things. How strong is the case against him?
I think it's extremely strong. And the police and the investigators are not in the business of telling us everything that they have. They want.
So she thinks it's extremely strong, the evidence against him. And she thinks law enforcement has a lot more than they're sharing with us because they're not in the business of sharing all of the details with us.
To put enough to get probable cause, to get a judge to sign that search warrant.
Yeah, we won't know perhaps until the preliminary hearing more evidence in the case. I find it interesting. Hoda and I were just talking about it. There were weeks and weeks where it seemed like there was nothing going on in the case. A lot of people were quite critical of the police department. Now we learn that perhaps they had been tracking the suspect since late November. Investigators have to make a decision at that point to keep things close to the vest. That helps with the investigation, I presume.
Exactly right. This is a case that's garnered so much attention worldwide, really. And so I think these investigators do not want to make any mistakes. They do not want to give the suspect any reason to have the case not go the way they want it to.
We've heard a lot about these internet sleuths. Everyone's trying to get in on the case.
So it's awesome to see her on here, right? The one thing I've already seen is people saying, oh, this shows all those interviews were biased that she did with NBC. They were trying to line her up to get her to come work here. And it's like, whatever, just wave bye to the haters. Her job is to be a lawyer. If they want a legal analyst to come on there and break down the law, why not? I think that's great. And it's a familiar face to a lot of people. Thanks, Kimberly, for this super sticker. Yeah, it's a familiar face. A lot of people are already going to connect with her and understand that they think she's a good lawyer. They've watched her try a case. So I think it adds a little intrigue.
And give their theories and in some cases name names. Do those kind of folks hurt a case, or can they occasionally help a case too?
I think they can do both, right? I think the internet sleuth, this has become something that really captivated the country, this case has. And so people want to talk about the evidence. They want to talk about the human impact. And these are college students, right? So I think it can be incredibly helpful for investigators. They pleaded to the public and asked for information about the white Elantra. But it could also be helpful, or not helpful, harmful when you start naming someone.
Yeah, especially when you don't have the.
Yeah, boom. She hit the nail on the head, what we've been saying here for weeks. It can be really helpful when we're trying to figure out where this Elantra is. We're trying to figure out connections between the suspect and the victims. We're trying to figure out a lot of this information. It can be really helpful, but it can also be harmful when you say, I'm positive it's this person before law enforcement has said anything, or, accuse people and their families, and everybody gets caught up in it. And it can also be very problematic, especially like with the DM stuff. It can be problematic with that as well. So we just have to be really careful how we use the power and reach that we have on social media.
Evidence. These are real lives you're talking about. Camille, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't miss the Today Show.
All right. So we got to hear even a little from Camille Vasquez. So please hit that like button if you haven't already and subscribe to our page, because the comments and the questions in here really bring this channel to the next level and allow us to answer the questions so many people have. Because once you ask a question, you're not alone. There's 5,300 people here in the chat. hopefully about 5,000 likes. Let me know how many likes, how close we are to 5,000 likes. But questions like this, Tom Farrell, and the next few we're going to read really add a lot of context to this and beef to this. They work the case away from the public. Correct. They use the public, but they work the case away from it. And that's exactly how it should be. You shouldn't show all your cards. The public is not a partner with law enforcement, but they can be an informant to law enforcement, right? Clever nickname. I had no idea how strong I was until Iraq. People don't give themselves enough credit for what they can do with a little faith. I agree. And I'm glad that that happens, right? I'm glad that we don't necessarily know what it's like before it happens, but when it happens, we have the strength to deal with it. You know, some people do. John O'Rourke, does all the evidence have to be submitted by the preliminary trial on January 12th? No, it does not. Myra Nicola, Camille, get it, girl. P.S. Peter, will we ever find out if the FBI is actually behind the traffic stops? I doubt it. I know they won't admit it, but can we find out? I mean, we already heard somebody from Fox report that they were. The FBI came out and said that they were not. I don't think we're ever going to really find out the truth one way or the other. Lita, BK wasn't smiling in the video from court. Seemed more like a courteous acknowledgement to his lawyer, in my opinion. I mean, and you see, like, these people work together a lot. If you look back to Nicholas Cruz, an admitted heinous crime that he did. He said he did it. He admitted he did it. We pretty much know why he did it from his journals and his social media posts. And even he and his lawyers would smile at each other from time to time. Years of working together and dealing with this case. It's the new reality for them. As much as, you know, everybody may hate them or may want them to be miserable or, you know, taken out immediately, which a lot of people did, especially for Nicholas Cruz. A nod to your lawyer, a smile to your lawyer. Again, that's why I think we have to be careful about going too far on what we see in one court hearing or one reaction or something like that. But that's a good point, Lita. Kathleen R. is also a new member. We have had a ton of new members. We are absolutely going to do a members-only chat here in January. So make sure if you want to join the membership, you can. But it's free to like, free to subscribe. That's what we're really about, is just getting more people in the conversation. That's the most important stuff to us, is bringing people together, discussing this stuff in a respectful manner so we can all learn from each other and hopefully help society be a little bit better, help society and social media as a whole be more helpful on these cases and not harmful. We don't want to be the ones people are talking about how we're hurting the case, how it's horrible for the case, how we're bringing people into the crosshairs with accusations and things like that. We want to be part of the solution, how we can be fair jurors, how we can be understanding, how we can apply the facts and the law and follow the law in the case so that the civil and criminal justice system can be effectual in the way that they were designed to be. That's really what's really important about a lot of these conversations and about how the context of these specific cases can really help us with that. So I have just a lot of respect for you guys and a lot of appreciation for you guys. And Rich Cat, Happy New Year to you as well. I'm glad you're back. We missed you in the chat every time you're not here. So if everybody can just hit that like button on your way out so people can know this video is there. And if anybody you know is interested in these two cases, send them the video so they can also get into the comment section. If you're watching this on the Rewatch crew, get into the comment section so we can keep talking about this stuff and what you guys are interested in. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you want to send me messages on there with more content ideas. Jason will go out with this one. Since the feds clocked him cleaning his car, do you think it's probable that they went behind him to collect rags, vacuum remnants, etc.? It's possible. And I like this comment points out a good fact. There are so many different angles that there could still be more evidence gathered. More evidence can be gathered here, and we're going to find out more. We're not done yet. And I think that's, Jason, that's a good point that there's going to be more to come. Anna P., thank you for this big super chat. We'll go out on this one. Hypothetically speaking, if a link between DM and BK were established during discovery, do you think he'd walk? I'm not saying it does. My heart aches for the two roommates. Just wondering how the prosecution would handle something like this. Okay, so this is pure speculation. And if we just remove names from this and we say in a situation like this where one person is accused and charged with murder, another person has a connection that was there at the scene, it's more likely that the person that was at the scene that has the connection would be added as a co-conspirator to the murder rather than the actual person committing the act would be let off. I don't think he would be let off. I think they would lose that eyewitness testimony. Maybe she would change her mind. I don't know. I mean, if she has a connection with him, but she's still willing to point him out of a lineup and say he did it, then it's even worse for him. If she does have a connection and she was actually lying and she, reneges her statement or changes her eyewitness statement, that could be beneficial for his defense. but it doesn't mean he would walk because, again, they have the cell phone, they have the car, they have the DNA on the sheath. They have a lot of information still connecting him to this crime. So I think it's a plausible kind of connection we might be able to make, but we'll see. There's still a lot of hoops to jump through and dots to connect before we get there. All right. I'm out of here, everybody. Hit that like button on your way out. See you later.